So we have Dr. Zink with us today. He's a professor of emergency medicine and senior associate dean for faculty and faculty development at University of Michigan Medical School. In his 33-year career, he's been a researcher in alcohol effects and trauma, an associate dean for student programs at UMMS, and served as the inaugural chair of emergency medicine at the Alpert School of Brown University. The Alpert Medical School of Brown University. Dr. Zink was honored to serve as president of the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine and the Association of Academic Chairs of Emergency Medicine. He also founded and serves as the co-director of the AACEM, a chair development program. He has won both the John Marks Leadership Award and the Hal Jane Academic Excellence Award from SAEM. Dr. Zink wrote the first comprehensive history of U.S. emergency medicine called Anyone, Anything, Anytime. And of further note, as Senior Associate Dean for Faculty and Faculty Development at University of Michigan Medical School, he leads the Office of Faculty Affairs and Faculty Development in supporting and informing the career progression of individual faculty while working with medical school departments on all faculty career aspects from recruitment through retirement. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Zink. You should have screen sharing capabilities if there's anything that you want to show everyone. But I know you mentioned that you also like this to be more of a question and answer format as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so thanks for that introduction, and good to be here with you. Just so I get a sense of who's on. So are we all medical students on the call?
Yes,
okay.
We are all medical students from the
great.
Michigan Journal of Medicine.
Right.
So reviewers and editors for the journal.
Great, good. Yeah, so writing's been a pretty big part of my career. Obviously, since I started out as a researcher, it was in the it's been somewhat in the realm of science and research and publications and journals and like. But even going back to medical school, I had a very strong writing emphasis and wrote various things, essays, poetry, things like that, and some published, some not. So taking on the work of putting on a journal was something I never did, or putting together a journal. But I've served as one of the things I do is serve as the associate editor for a journal called Academic Emergency Medicine, which and I'm the associate editor for the reflections section. So that is essays, creative writing pieces, poetry, sometimes photographs that are submitted to that journal. And so it's a lot of fun. I get submissions from medical students, get it from residents, from faculty, from once in a while a layperson, but yeah, it's fun to do that reviewing of creative writing as well, and that's something. And then I wrote this book on the history of emergency medicine, the first edition in 2005. It was published in 2005, and then the second edition was I redid it with a different publisher in 2018. So that was probably the biggest scholarly lift of my career, was writing this history book while I was a faculty member. So yeah, so I don't have anything particularly prepared, but I always love to engage with students and see what you're thinking, and I'm happy to answer questions about my own writing or my experiences with being my experience with being an associate editor in a medical journal, or just in general about people in medicine and their writing. So I'd be happy to just engage in a discussion. I think that'd probably be the most useful thing I can do, rather than trying to lecture you on writing.
Dr. Zink, how do you balance all of the various commitments that you have with, time to write, and when do you find, free time to be able to do so?
Yeah, that's Peter. Yeah, thanks, Peter. So I think the idea that you can never have balance in anything, like, people talk about, work-life balance, or, professional and personal balance, or, balancing your work life with your family. And if it's perfectly balanced, it might be for like a few hours, but in my experience, so I think you always end up with some things taking either more of your time or more precedence. But it's incredibly important for writing, whether you're writing to keep your career goals moving in terms of your academic writing for journal articles or research articles or case reports or whatever you're doing, whether you're doing that or whether you're doing creative writing. I think it really is important to make sure that you're allowing some amount of time, and that may not be the same time every day, or the same amount of time every day, or even every week. But I do think it's really important to not have your writing time, which does require a block, for most people, to not have that be, your leftover time, or your time when you're kind of used up already, when you're feeling too tired or anything. So I journal, and I've journaled since I was, 19 years old. So, but my journaling, I'll just kind of do spontaneously, and I might journal, once a week, or I might go a couple weeks, and it might be on different days. It's probably more on the weekends than it would be during the week. But I've kept that up for 40 years, more than that. And that's been, just to kind of keep the writing juices flowing. But I can just kind of pop that in for 20 or 30 minutes, around my other schedule. But, most people who I think are really effective writers tend to find when their brain is the most, is in the best place to do writing, and is got the most energy. For a lot of people, that is in their wake up hours in the morning, that they will, they may not, before they really jump into their day, they will take, a couple hours and write. For other people, it might be in the, if you're a night owl, and it might be that you get everything else done that you need to do in the day, and then write, from 10 till midnight or something, or even later. So I think you have to just kind of feel out when your brain is doing its best work in terms of writing, and when you have some uninterrupted time, because it generally takes, you can't write something, I think, high quality by trying to put it together in little 15-minute excerpts or whatever. So I do think it's important to block out the time. For me, actually, even though I think I do my best thinking and everything in the morning, what I tend to come up with is ideas for writing in the morning, but not actually do writing, because I tend to kind of jump into my activities of the day, and I have a lot of email volume, so I'll try to kind of get a start on that, or different tasks. But and then other people have the strategy of really trying to get much more than just a good time of day to write. They will actually try to block out a significant portion of time that would be time away. So it might be most of a weekend, or it might be that they are almost doing their own little writing retreat. So when I wrote the initial book on the history of emergency medicine, I actually took a sabbatical and had most of 9 months without clinical duties. I worked a few clinical shifts during that time, but and I did the oral history interviews of all the people that I needed to speak with, about 45 people who I ended up interviewing, doing oral history interviews, and traveled all over the country. And then, but then I went to Vermont with my family, and on Lake Champlain, rented a little place, and let the family kind of go off and play. And then I basically wrote, every day for about 6 or 8 hours, looking out over Lake Champlain and the beautiful Adirondack Mountains in the background. And that was how I got a lot of the book done. It was during that, dedicated time. So kind of depending on the size of the project, you may find that you actually need to take some actual writing time, and and just totally dedicate it to that. And during that time, I wasn't answering emails. I wasn't, doing anything else other than writing, and, with a huge pile of materials all around me to write a few of the chapters of the book. I didn't get it all done then, but I got a good portion of it done.
Thank you.
Sort of as like a follow-up question on that, like in terms of your academic and clinical obligations, do you have like set aside protected time for like writing or, I guess like research activities? And then maybe can you talk a little bit about like different paths that people could choose that maybe they would get more or less protected time?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so right now in the dean's office, I'm about 60% effort in the dean's office. So I have about 30 to 40% in emergency medicine. So between those two things, there's not a lot of time, but I do have more flexibility than if I were working, more days a week clinically, which is not time obviously you can write. So I try to work writing into my time that is not clinical or not administrative. And in terms of getting predicted time, like the way academic medicine is financed, you're not going to likely get through your chair or whoever you're working under, you're probably not going to get some amount of effort for you to do actual writing. I mean, it may be that you have time that's protected for research effort, and then as part of that, you're going to be writing in that space. There are some journals that if you get a prominent position in them, they might give you 10 or 15% effort and fund that, fund that portion of your salary for the work on the journal. But it tends to be then you're functioning more as a reviewer for the journal than a writer. So most people that do writing are doing it on the borrowed time from other things, I would say. When I was early in my career and I had research grants, that again would buy down the time, so I didn't have to work as much clinically in the emergency department, and that did allow me to use some of that time for doing research, doing experiments, being in the lab. But then other time was writing my scientific manuscripts, but then I also always used some of that time for doing more creative writing or more opinion piece or essay or letter to the editor, that type of writing as well. But yeah, it's hard. But most academic jobs will have a built-in, so even if you're quote full-time clinical, that will tend to be 4 or 4.5 days a week. So you'll have a half day to kind of do all your other academic work. And if your teaching is included in your clinical work, then you may not have to spend that half day or extra day or your protected day teaching. So it's usually catching up on academic things or doing potentially having some writing time built into that day as well. Again, you got to protect it though. You have to say from 2 to 4 p.m. No meetings, no other activities. I'm going to write during the time.
What's usually your process for writing? Do you do a draft first, or do you have an outline? How do you formulate the ideas in your head first?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so I tend to get the idea or the snippet or whatever if I'm doing more creative writing. But this would be writing something on professionalism now. So it would be a few scattered ideas that I would collect either in the notes section of my iPhone or potentially in a to-do list that I'm going to say, I'm writing a paper on professionalism. And so in the to-do list, in the underneath the item, I would write, a few things. And then I would build that into an outline. And I'll usually, for that outline have sections. So I'll have, do it like a traditional outline. I'll have a Roman numeral 1, and it'll be introduction, and then, kind of build the outline from that. And then I will look for the block of time to try to at least get the intro written. And I usually find that if I can get the intro written and then get the, and then start following the outline, that I can work from that. And that once I get it going, I'll come back to it. I won't come back to it if it's just an idea with a couple, things, typed down. But if I'm able to get a better start on it, where I've at least got, a page or two written, then it becomes like a real thing. And I will usually finish it, in a reasonable time frame, rather than if it's just an idea. But I mean, once in a while, I have something I'm working on now, related to like I'm calling it the unhelpful intensity in medicine. So it's a piece on how we don't do ourselves any favor in academic medicine by our competitiveness and always comparing ourselves to others. And I think it's part of the burnout that people experience. But I had a lot of different ideas about that, and so I guess it was early last week, I went into a conference room and the whiteboard, and I just started. I had the central idea, and then I just kind of started writing down all the things I wanted to go into this paper, and it was really helpful to just kind of scrawl it all over, a big space, and then I took a picture of it, and then took that back, and from that I made my outline. I was able to kind of reorder the things that were just kind of sprayed across the whiteboard, and that's a paper that I hope to generate in the next few months. But so there's lots of different ways to do it, but I actually thought that I haven't done that in a while. I thought that was kind of a fun thing to do. There are a lot of people who write who still, at least from my era, who still like physically writing, and that they feel like their ideas get into a workable format through actually physically with a pen on paper, or maybe like I did on a board, actually physically writing, and that transfer of ideas into something that will be meaningful to write occurs better than if you're typing. Now, I think your generation is much more typing, and when I see my kids, they're much more putting ideas down by typing them out. But for some people, there's still that kind of connection between the thinking and then what you might call the art of writing, the physical, actual writing letters down with your hand. And so,
in terms of like talking about writing and authorship, it sounds like you did a lot of this as like a really like monumental singular effort. Did you decide, it sounds like you interviewed some people as well, did you decide to pull in like co-authors at any point? And if so, like how do you manage that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so for this history of emergency medicine book, I was as you mentioned, I was the president of our academic society for emergency medicine, and just in talking with other leaders and people say, gee, the leaders of our specialty, it just started, in the 1970s, but they're getting into their 60s and 70s, and some of them early 80s. Someone should really interview them and write a book about their experiences in getting the field started here in the U.S. And I would go around, I'd talk at different grand rounds and things, and I would always kind of ask to see if there's anyone that was going to be doing that. And no one seemed like they wanted to do it. And I finally said, well, if this is going to get done, I think I should do it. I like to write, and it's a big task. And then I was at a point in my career where I could get a sabbatical. And so I made that my sabbatical project. And then started doing all the groundwork. I didn't really know how to do oral history interviews very well. So I learned from Dr. Howell here and Dr. Markell about doing good oral history interviews. I utilized them to help me with that. I did some other training and educational things in the oral history interview styles. And then I just read a lot about the era of that I was going to be writing about, because it really was kind of a social political thing in terms of the evolution of emergency medicine in the country. But as I thought about doing it with someone else, I just realized, I thought that if I'm doing a book, and I want to interview all these people and everything, I really didn't want to split it up. I was a little selfish. I think I wanted the whole experience, and I actually wanted the whole credit for doing it because no one else really seemed like they wanted to do it. And I actually think it was easier to do it. The first time I did it, the editor, I used Elsevier was the publishing company, and they were not particularly great with the editing. I basically wrote the whole book, submitted it to them, and they made almost no changes. And while I was writing it, I would send them chapters and they'd say, oh, that's great, keep going. But I really didn't have good editing. And then the second time I did it with a different publisher, and I had an editor assigned to me who was much more able to review and critique. And I ended up actually reducing the text of the book a little bit, and putting in some more graphics and photos and the like. But the importance of the editor is really, I think you can't underestimate having a good editor, because the second version of the book, I think, reads a lot better than the first version did because of the editing, and just for things that I omitted, actually, that probably I felt were important the first time around, but I think they were more for me wanting to chronicle everything and make sure I didn't miss anything, but they weren't really things that were essential, to tell the story of the development of the specialty. So, but in terms of a co-author, I didn't really think about it, and I think it's hard. It's hard to have a co-author in a big project. I certainly, for like textbooks, it's typical to have multiple editors and maybe like one or two senior editors of a big textbook if you endeavor to write that. And I've been involved in that. I've been the editor of one of the big emergency medicine textbooks, along with 4 or 5 other people. And that was fun, but it wasn't nearly as much fun as writing a book on my own.
For editing the textbook, so would that have been more of a situation where you like oversaw like a couple individuals writing like specific chapters?
Yeah, we had, gosh, I don't know how, we probably had 140 chapters. So I think I had 20 or 25 chapters that I was the associate editor for this textbook, overseeing those authors who were writing the chapters in these different topics within the field of emergency medicine. Yeah, so that's typically how that will work, and it's fun. I didn't find it as nearly as invigorating as writing something myself, and I didn't. There are some people who just naturally write pretty well, and there are others that might be really smart, but they don't write particularly well. So having to take someone's chapter that wasn't very well written and try to edit it without totally rewriting it is a little bit of a challenge. You may have experienced that yourselves, and working with others when you're reviewing their writing, it can be a little bit challenging. But yeah, I mean, some people love editing, whether it's journal editing or textbook editing. The textbook editing was not something I felt that very enthusiastic about. I mean, I did it because it was an important thing to have this high quality textbook come out, but it wasn't something that I look forward to, every week working on it.
So it sounds like I think that's something also a lot of us probably struggle with too, is like, how do you balance that line of like, wanting to make something, high quality, but also, it's not your own, you want to respect the boundaries of the authors.
Yeah, I think it is a really tough thing. And there are styles, and who's to say that another person's style, I mean, unless it's, grammatically incorrect or offensive or something, it's like, who's to say that their style or the way they're choosing to write is it may be different from yours, but it doesn't mean that it's not, it's not worth publishing. So.
If you don't mind, do you mind if I ask you a couple questions just sort of about like faculty development as well, for like paths that you oversee?
Yeah, sure.
So In terms of like faculty development in the medical school, do you oversee career development in paths of both like clinical and research?
Mhm. Yes, yes. So we have, the three pathways, or three tracks that faculty are appointed in. We have the tenure track, which is the, very academic track. And some people may be in that track primarily as researchers. Some are as clinicians, and some are hybrid, where they're doing both. So many of our prominent physicians who are faculty would in the tenure track would be both, clinically do clinical work, research, and education. So they're kind of the triple threats, as you call them. But then we have a clinical track in the medical school and a research track. So research track are typically PhDs. Tenure track can also include PhDs though as well. So depending on whether they become kind of independent investigators in their work. And then the clinical track would be people who are, putting typically, more than half their time in clinical work, and usually much more than half, usually 3/4 or 80 or sometimes even 90% of their time in clinical work. And so, yes, we have three different tracks for people to be appointed in. And then as they develop, we have very well-defined criteria for how you go from being assistant professor, which is usually the entry-level track or entry-level title, and then going up through associate professor and then professor. And in the tenure track, it's the most challenging because you have to have, a level of productivity in terms of your academic work. You typically, if you're research oriented, you have to have some level of funding where to get promoted to associate professor, you would have to have be independently funded. So you would have to have some level of NIH or equivalent funding that would indicate that you're supporting a good portion of your effort and salary through these grants that come in. And then you have to have, typically when you're promoted in the tenure track, to be promoted at the associate professor level, you would have roughly at least probably 30 peer-reviewed, usually research-oriented publications, and then probably some book chapters and other things, but you'd have about 30 publications. And then to get promoted at the professor level in the tenure track, you'd be up around 50 or 60 or 70, and some people have 150 publications. So but that's over a 20-year time period, typically, something like that. Maybe not 20, they're probably 12 to 18 years would be typical, something like that, to get to professor. And for the clinical track, it's because you're doing a lot more clinical time. There are numerous pathways within that you can choose to advance on. So there's a clinician educator pathway, there's a clinician research scholar, a clinician administrator, clinician patient quality and safety pathway, and then there's one that's kind of a hodgepodge where you can be doing lots of different things. It's called clinician and individualized pathway. So in those cases, the publication numbers are much less. So scholarly products for that to get to associate professor would be 10 instead of 30-ish, and to get to professor would be about 20. But then you also have to be demonstrating, excellence as a clinician and very importantly as an educator, where you've got your teaching evaluations from medical students and residents are very key in getting promoted in that track. And then for research track, there are two different pathways, and one is for people that are going to be a little bit more independent in their research and being like the principal investigator on grants, and the other one is more for like a team science type person, and you can get promoted in those two pathways. So those are kind of the three tracks, and we're pretty traditional that way. Many medical schools are set up that way, and it's really key to have good mentors early on to help kind of guide you through the process. That people that have been through it, so they know what it takes to get promoted and to move along. And typically, so what does it mean to get promoted? Well, if you're in the tenure track and you get promoted to associate professor, it's very difficult to be removed from your position at that point. You almost have to commit a felony, to be removed from from your tenured position as a faculty member. The clinical and research track do not have tenure. It's still pretty hard to remove someone who's functioning well, but the advantage of tenure then is that you have job security. You also then can take a sabbatical, like I did. I was a tenured associate professor when I took my sabbatical. So that's a really nice benefit, because you get 6 months with full pay, or a year with half pay during that time. So you can go off, and many people travel, go to other institutions to do their sabbatical, and often they'll combine it with a way that they can do something with their family that's really fun and exciting as well. So so sabbatical and job security are the main benefits of tenure. In the other tracks, there usually is a salary increase that occurs with promotion to associate professor. So that may be it may be it could be 5%, it could be 10%. It depends on the department in terms of how much money you get. But there's typically a salary bump when you get promoted as well. So it's monetary. And then for a lot of people, it gives you the freedom, if you're in the tenure track, to kind of, now that you got job security, to maybe branch off in an area that might not be, for instance, is readily fundable, but it's an exciting new area where you can take a little more risk, in your academic endeavors, once you get promoted. Did that answer your question?
That was fantastic to sort of hear about that framework. Just for a little more, I guess, clarity, when you get tenure, what it sounds like tenure means some increased job security, some increased creative freedom. At what is that the full definition of tenure? And then is it still dependent on you getting external funding?
Yeah, so if you reach associate professor, you would have had some level of external funding and be viewed as someone who's a quote independent investigator, independent scholar. And then to get to professor, yeah, you can't just, Professor Angelos, you would have to have a continued support of your scholarly work, your research efforts to get promoted to professor, and that's typically in a 5 or 6 year time frame to get there. So yeah, so I may have expanded too much. From the time you start as assistant professor, usually it's about 8 years to get, we have an 8 year clock. So you have to put yourself forward usually in year 6 or 7 as you run up against that 8 year clock. And then it's typically about 5 or 6 years before you would get to professor after you're promoted to associate professor. So it's probably more like 12 years or so. But it's a long process to get promoted. You'll start in April of, say if you started in April of 2022 and you went through the whole process and it was approved, you'll get seven steps of review of your packet that's put forward for promotion. And that goes all the way from your department level, through these committees in the med school, through the executive committee of the med school, through the provost office, and then finally to the president's office, and then actually to the regents. And so if you started, say, in April of 2022, you would be able to call yourself an associate professor, if that's what you're applying for, in September of 23. So it's like a 1.5 year process, very, very detailed process, very, a lot of scrutiny is given to people who go up for promotion, not just in the tenure track, but in the clinical and research track as well. So I spent a good part of my day doing that in the running the executive committee meeting of the medical school, where we looked at about 26 applicants for promotion. Yeah, so it's a very time intensive thing and very meaningful. I mean, it's kind of your academic credibility. So and again, did I answer your question? Let's see. So in terms of yeah, you asked about the in terms of tenure. So so benefits tenure. There's really an argument about for medical school faculty. One of the things that you use the word academic freedom, Morgan, and that's on campus. What a lot of people really value is when they get tenure. They can either go off on a tangent. They can do things they can maybe say things, they can maybe be a little more controversial. They really have that freedom. And you don't see people in medicine finding that to be a big need, that they're going to go off and, whatever, speak this or say that or write this that might be controversial or draw some criticism. So, and given that most physicians won't have enough research time and effort to be able to generate what's needed to get promoted in the tenure track, there's really a lot of question about, what will be the future of tenure in medical schools. So when I was at Brown University had tenure, right? So in their normal faculty, but the medical school faculty did not have tenure. I mean, we had a track that was similar to the tenure track in terms of requirements, but there was no tenure. What was the benefit there? Well, you got a reasonable promotion salary increase with the promotion, but that was it. And you got you were able to distinguish yourself by calling yourself an associate professor or professor at Brown, but you were not tenured there. And there are a number of schools that are like that. I mean, some of the more traditional universities, Penn, Wash U, Northwestern. I mean, they will all have tenure tracks, but some universities are getting away from it. And I actually don't think that's a bad idea for academic physicians. Samantha.
Hi, Dean Zink. I had a quick question. So I'm trying to absorb all the information as you're saying it. So when, let's say we finish residency and we're looking to be an academic physician, is this all laid out? This might seem like a silly question, but is this laid out in like a packet that we can review and follow and structure our efforts? Because I think that's one of the things, like recognizing in med school, like you have to hit these certain check boxes to apply for certain things or do certain work. And so it seems very similar in this way. And I'm just wondering how guidance is provided to these physicians.
It's much more word of mouth. It's like, once you declare your specialty and you get into it, it's much more like now you're in a tribe and you talk to the elders and you find people that and respect, and then they guide you, on what to do. Now you could, so yes, in faculty affairs, a book online, you could go and look at it right now. It's Office of Faculty Affairs. If you go to that website and then type in faculty handbook, you'll see there's a faculty handbook, and it lists basically all the stuff I've told you about the different tracks and everything. That's all in there, and you could get a good understanding of how you advance, and the requirements are in there and everything. So that's all in there. But your kind of your personal strategy on do I want to be, if I want to be an academic physician, just the advice on, like, do I want to be more clinically oriented, or do I want to be more education oriented, or do I think if I'm in an institution a university that has tenure, do I think I want to push toward the tenure track? If so, what would be required? And someone would probably tell you, well, if you want to be, so in emergency medicine, if you want to be in the tenure track, you're probably going to need to, after residency, do a fellowship or a research oriented fellowship, because that's how you get academic jobs in emergency medicine right now, is that you probably need to do a fellowship and start your path to kind of subspecializing in an area, whether that's in injury, or it's in cardiac arrest, or whatever it might be, or health policy, or whatever, lots of different pathways. But you're probably going to need a fellowship. And then after your fellowship, you hopefully get a job and might be appointed as an assistant professor. And then you've got about 6 or 7 years to develop, to try to then apply to get promoted to associate professor. And that's going to be a heavily mentored experience for you. And you'll be able to, hopefully progress. So a lot of it's written down in terms of kind of the rules and the criteria that are needed to get promoted in the different tracks, and just kind of the normal progression. We have great faculty development resources here for people. And for instance, anyone who comes in as a junior faculty here will have a mentoring team assigned, and we'll have what's called a launch committee. that will help you through your first year and just kind of give you all the info you need, and you know, with a group of mentors, usually one primary mentor and then some secondary mentors. And then through faculty development, we have all kinds of workshops on, you know, early career this, early career that, you know, how to write a research grant, how to, you know, so there's a lot of resources provided. That's one of our strength areas here is the faculty development offerings. You won't see that necessarily everywhere, but there's a promotions do's and don't workshop for each of the 3 tracks. There's a separate promotion do's and don'ts, and there's you know, how to write a good CV, and it's, you know, how to you know, grant writing, manuscript writing workshops, just a lot of that stuff that we provide. So some of it's programmatic, some of it is just always emphasize that you need to have, you know, you need to establish good mentors early on as a faculty member, and you can just see the people who have a good mentorship team, not just one person, but they have a you know, we call a stable of mentors. They're the ones who end up doing the best because they're getting good advice, and they're well connected. And when they have crisis times or times when things aren't going so bad, they rely on the mentors to kind of help them get through it, and, you know, show them that they had hard times too, and it wasn't all roses and sunshine, and that you're going to have some struggles, your grant's not going to get a good score, or publication is going to get rejected, and, you know, just helping people weather through when things aren't totally positive.
I like the idea of a launch committee. Now, if someone meets the requirements for promotion, and they hit all the check boxes, what if there has been experience, and whether or not you can share this, I don't know, but like, what would prevent them from then being promoted if something were to exist to keep them from that, if they hit all the requirements that are being asked of them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get it all the time, Samantha. So yeah, so if I've hit all the criteria, if I'm a superstar, why do I have to wait, you know, another couple of years? So that happens. So for instance, in the clinical track, we have this bar for associate professor, it's around 10 scholarly products. So that could be book chapters, you know, articles, it can even be web-based stuff, educational materials and stuff. So if you get to 10, so normally from the time you go, you're assistant professor, clinical assistant professor, where you only need 1 scholarly product to be appointed as a clinical assistant professor as a junior faculty member. But by the time you get up to 10, the normal time period would be about 5 years. And you would, in year 5, you would go up for promotion if you've met that bar. But we have people who meet that bar in year 3 or year 4. We generally don't let people go up in year 3 because we feel like there needs to be a little bit of time in their rank. But if someone wants to come up early, like in year 4, what we will, and we just had this discussion today, we generally will say that you need to not just meet, but kind of exceed the criteria and all. So for teaching, scholarly output, national reputation, if you clearly exceed all that, you know, if you're above kind of the normal standards for that at year 4, then you've got a good chance of being promoted then. So it's kind of the rising stars that will get that. So it's possible, but if you just barely meet the criteria in year 4, we'll usually say, just wait a year, and then you're gonna be, you know, no doubt about the fact you'll get promoted, you know, in year 5. So there's kind of there is a waiting period. It's adhered to generally, but there are some exceptions for people that really are, you know, kind of achieving at a very high level. And that's the same in all the tracks where people can be considered to come up early. But if you're going to come up early, you better be, you know, really, really good. So, and that's not, you can argue whether that's right or wrong. It's just the way we do it here. So. But like, for instance, going up for a professor, like normally you would say there's like a 5-year wait between associate professor and professor, but there are people that have come up in year 3 even for a professor because they were really highly qualified when they got promoted to associate professor. They were well above all of our expectations. And then in the following 3 years, they've just blown it away in terms of how great they're doing. And someone's trying to recruit them to another institution. And then we say, well, we'd like to keep them, and we think we're going to make them a professor here. So if someone is really, really achieving at a super high level, we will sometimes bend those rules a little bit. It's a strategy of advancing sometimes for some people is to get a good offer from elsewhere, and then all of a sudden your home institution will show you more love, right? So. Other questions?
So it sounds like so there is sort of this timeline from moving from assistant professor to associate professor, and then you'll have this timeline again before from associate professor to tenured full professor. Is that correct?
Yeah, but in the but you could go longer. So as in the tenure track here, as in most places, if you don't achieve at a level where you could get promoted from assistant to associate professor within a certain time frame, you're called up or out. And so it doesn't happen that much because you can change tracks. So if someone thinks they want to be in the tenure track, they're an assistant professor, but they're really not generating many publications. They haven't been able to get many grants. They're not, maybe as nationally active as they thought. They can request a track change to go into the clinical track where the criteria are low. And they may find out, hey, I want to see more patients. I want to be more clinically involved, or I want to be more of an educator. And a tenure track isn't really, my pathway. So you can do that. But if you're going to stick with the tenure track from the time you're named an assistant professor, you have a standard 8 years, and you need to go up usually in year 6 or 7, because if you wait till 8 years and don't get it, then you're going to basically your department is supposed to terminate you, and so it's called up or out. In the med school, we've created a 10-year clock, so you can actually apply to be on a 10-year clock. So you would have to put yourself up for promotion in year 8 or 9, and we found that works well for people who as you're finish residency, and you might do a fellowship, and so that, and then you've delayed, if you want to have a family and you might want to have kids, you've delayed all that, and so you're in your mid-30s, and you're wanting to have a family and try to get tenure at the same time. Doing that in an 8-year time frame is not very feasible for some people. So we want to be sensitive to that, because our physicians start later in their career than someone who's a PhD on campus and is in the tenure track. So we have this 10-year clock that you can do. The disadvantage is that it's longer to get promoted, and the benefits of promotion are not there for you. But for some people, having that added flexibility to be able to space it out a little bit more while they might be trying to do parenting or have a life outside medicine is important as well. So
I know we're running a little overtime, so if anyone has any last questions. I had one last question that I sort of wanted to address before we wrap things up. I know you have done some publications on diversity in medicine and in academic medicine. Do you mind speaking a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when I was at Brown, I came in as a new department chair. Actually, they didn't tell me this without interviewing, but the department I came into had some major issues with I guess you would say, it was just women faculty weren't very comfortable, and there weren't many of them, and they weren't very comfortable in that department. And there was some level of sexual harassment. It wasn't the most egregious type of sexual harassment, but it was there, and it was offensive. And so when I came into that, I was given a report that from an external reviewers that showed how bad it was in the department I was becoming the new chair in, so we need to do something about it. So I worked very closely with the women faculty there. I also, intentionally hired with an eye toward increasing the number of women in the faculty, just to help diversify the faculty workforce, and we were very successful at that. And then once we it was understood that we were actually a very welcoming place for women to come and start their academic careers. We hired a lot of women, so we went from 13% women to 42% women in about 6 years. So a really amazing transformation there. But yeah, so during that time, I was working with women. I got to understand, aspects of women's career development that were different from men, and so we did a lot of programs, and I ended up being, writing and being involved in papers where they wanted to kind of describe what we did and some of the best practices for advancing women and we made strides overall in terms of those underrepresented in medicine. We didn't do as well as I would have hoped there, but we also made some strides there. So it's something that if you just have a sense of wanting the best for all of your faculty, you don't have to look at people's gender and race and ethnicity. I mean, it's just like, let's be fair, understand the challenges that everyone has, that those challenges will be different for different faculty, and let's just make a really fair, equitable department or work environment for everyone. And once you get buy-in to that kind of mentality, it just kind of snowballs on itself in terms of being able to attract people who share those types of views.
I think Sammy has her hand raised.
Yes, I had one more question. That 10-year option before the up and out scenario sounds great to have because it seems more inclusive. And I was wondering, out of curiosity, if you've done like any tabling of the data from the people who go that route versus the faster route with the 7 or 8 years. And if you have, like, if there's discrepancies or differences between genders or other demographics, because I think that would be interesting to look at, of who utilizes that pathway versus the other one.
Yeah. So we have looked at that because it's been brought up a number of times by the people that are looking carefully at the advancement of women here. So our time to promotion, and when the latest data that we got on this was the time from assistant professor to promotion in the tenure track for men was 6.4 years, and for women it was 6.7. So it was a little bit higher. We probably, if you looked at it statistically, probably not significant, but so women were in general taking a little bit longer. Was it because they were more likely to take the tenure pathway? See, even if you take the tenure pathway, it doesn't mean you have to wait to come up. So a woman or a man could decide they're going to do the tenure track, but they might find that they actually progress pretty well, and so they would still go up in year 6 or 7 anyway. And I think that's what happened. So it's clear that more women have elected to take the tenure clock, but they aren't necessarily waiting to go up. It's, I think, what we're finding so far. So if we looked at the last, I can't remember if it was 10 or 15 years, but I actually thought it was going to be more. I thought it was maybe going to be a year or 2 difference, but we're not seeing that yet. So that, in some ways, I'm kind of happy. So you have that option, but you may not need it. So it gives you maybe the peace of mind. But people want to get promoted, and they want the benefits, and they want the salary. So I think what happens is that it gives a little bit of freedom and flexibility, and maybe takes some of the anxiety out of it, but it doesn't actually change when people go up.
That's good. I think that really speaks to then the culture of well, I'll speak from my gender, from like women feeling empowered to like promote themselves, which is not always the case. So the fact that they're so close together of like wanting to submit their application for promotion is really good. So thank you, Dean Zink.
Yeah. So some of our most prominent women leaders, Reshma Jagsi and Eve Kerr, and from it, they were all over this, because they're like, well, okay, we know we have gender inequity in terms of salary. So if all the women are doing a 10-year clock, then they're not going to get promoted as fast, and then they're not going to get the salary bump with promotion, and then they're just going to be chronically behind. They're never going to catch up with men in terms of salary, and that we still have. So that's still a concern, but the data we provided did show that. Now just to let you know, we have a faculty salary gender equity committee that we started a couple years ago, and we actually go through every department and we look at time in rank. We look at the promotion status and everything, and we go through every person and we cohort them, and we look at years in rank. We look at their grant funding and everything. And if we do all that analysis and we find that a woman is making $10,000 less than a male who's equivalent in rank, we will adjust the salary up. And so there are people, and sometimes it's for men too, but it's more commonly for women. And we've had a number of women in the last couple of years that have got unexpected mid-year salary adjustments because this gender equity committee could not figure out, and we would then have to conclude that it's something related to unconscious bias or something else that is in the mix. And so one of the things is that some men will advance their salary, as I said, through looking elsewhere, and then they'll get a retention bonus or something, and women are less likely to do that, probably because they're more likely, again, this is generalizing, but they're more likely to be attentive to if they have children, that I don't want to uproot my kids and put them in different schools. So I'm not, even though there might be something out there, I'm just going to kind of stay at home while my kids are in this, kind of in this phase of life. And so, and it looks like men may be, more willing to look, and so women might get penalized for that. And then that could be a source of inequity, because that man got bumped and the woman didn't, in this whatever year. And then that just compounds over time, because we have merit-based salary increases. And so that percentage, if the percentage increase that the male gets every year is based on they 10,000 more than what that person than the woman had in that year, it's going to magnify. It's a compounding effect. So just some interesting things there, but we've seen that happen, and but we're actually doing a very careful look to try to move toward more toward gender equity in salaries, because it's a nationwide problem. It's across, it's not just limited to medicine, unfortunately, but it's a real thing. And having a daughter in medicine, I'm like, you're going to make as much as the guys.
Yeah, that's great. And may I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
How common is it for a hospital system to have a gender equity committee like we have here at Michigan Medicine?
I don't think it's universal. Let me put it that way. So interestingly, the way this came about is, so this will make you less impressed with us. The way this came about is that there's something called the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, with EEOC. What's the Equal Opportunity Occupational Commission? Yeah. So that's a federal body. Someone within our medical school filed a complaint about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, concern for salary inequity. And as a result of that, the EEOC comes to your institution and says, this was a complaint that was filed, you need to address it. And so as part of that agreement with the EEOC, and as a way of they can just come in and start fining you, if they do it. But we said, well, no, we're very serious about addressing this. We're going to put together this group. We're going to review, all the numbers I was talking about are based on tenure track, because we're required by the university, again, since most of the faculty who are in the university who are not in the medical school are tenure track, the EEOC wanted us to look at tenure track faculty. So that's the analysis we've done so far. But yeah, so it started off with basically a requirement from the federal government, which we probably should have been doing anyway, but it then has transitioned into this entity that will be enduring. And we were required to do it for 3 years, but we've already been doing it for 2.5, and we are actually going to ramp it up. So we're doing all faculty, not just the tenure track faculty. So it'll be something that's built into our faculty affairs office to have regular departmental gender equity reviews. Yeah, so yeah, it's just the right thing, right? So shouldn't be that hard.
It's an interesting concept that you bring up about the compounding, because I've heard that for like other scenarios, and it makes sense, that if you're getting increases on salary based on that initial bump, small differences will be magnified into like great differences later. So
yeah, one of the things we're trying to do with department chairs, because department chairs recognize this too, is that if you have someone that's got the big offer elsewhere, it's like don't put it into their into their regular salary that will grow every year, by like a cost of living increase. Don't give them added money that way. Put it as what's called deferred compensation, where you can say, okay, we're going to give you $50,000, and it's making that's over 3 years, but you have to stay 3 years to get that money. Otherwise, you have to pay it back. But then that money is just like, it's like bonus money for that person, so it doesn't go into their salary and what's calculated as their salary increase each year. So you could argue, well, the woman didn't get $50,000, but on the other hand, the woman doesn't get penalized by the compounding component of that. If the person got money, and then the person has to stay, they can't keep threatening to leave, and so you defer that. And so we're trying to encourage people to do that rather than give money, or to not even look at salary, to look at other other benefits that might be, well, you need you need a research assistant, or you need something else to help you develop. But yeah, we've noticed that in this one committee where we're looking at how to support our best and brightest research faculty, is that more men will seek retention packages than women, and so we're very conscious of that.
okay, well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I want to say thank you so much for sharing all this with us. I think a lot of these areas are things that like we know exist, but that we don't know much about. So it's really great to hear. I think in med school, these pathways are there, but maybe not like a whole other bunch of details about them. So thank you so much for sharing all this with us.
You're welcome. Yeah, I thought I was going to talk a lot about writing and journal editing, but it's good to go off on a tangent, especially if there's high interest. So I'm happy to do so.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And yeah, I'm gonna stick around on the call for a few minutes. But yeah, thank you for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great night.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks everyone. Take care.